Hi there, thanks for tuning in. Let's talk about MIDI. What is MIDI? If I'm being totally honest, I haven't the slightest idea. I have a working knowledge of MIDI that is tenuous at best. So when I tell you that this method of using MIDI to automate guitar patch changes in Reaper is stupid easy, then you know that I'm telling you the truth, because someone like me figured it out. However, there are a few things that I do actually know about MIDI, and it's probably important that you know them too, so let's go over them really quickly. First of all of my knowledge here is based on my use case experience with an Axe-FX 2 XL Plus and a Windows laptop. This method should work with a Line 6 Helix or a Quad Cortex or any other guitar processing device that can use MIDI over USB protocol. It should also work for just about any other device that accepts MIDI signals as well, but if they don't have MIDI over USB, you'll have to get a MIDI to USB interface for your computer. Since I don't have one of these and I have no experience with them, I'm afraid I can't make any recommendations. So if you know anything about these and you have a good recommendation, drop it in the comments below. So the first thing that we're interested in is something called a program change message. A program change message will typically be used to tell your hardware to switch to a different preset, which you'll define in a value from 0 to 127. This appears to be universal among most MIDI-enabled hardware. The second important thing is somewhat specific to the Axe-FX and is one of the reasons why I like this unit so much, and that is scenes. Inside each program patch on the Axe-FX, there are 8 individual scenes. These scenes can be toggled between, and each scene can have its own set of effects. On the Axe-FX, your program patch is built out of blocks, and each of these blocks can be toggled on or off on each of these different scenes. So the Axe-FX, when it loads a program patch, will load all of these blocks into memory. That way, when you switch between scenes, theoretically, the change is seamless. It's nice. One of the reasons I like the Axe-FX so much is for effect spillover. On one scene, I can have my delays and reverbs for my lead sound, and then when I switch back to my normal rhythm sound, the wet effects spill over into the new patch, even though all of those blocks are now turned off. And that's possible because the Axe-FX loads the entire patch all at once. I said theoretically this change is seamless, and this is a bit of a tangent here, so if you don't care about any of this, you can skip to this part in the video. One of the issues we've run into with this setup is that now we have 2 guitar players, and our second guitarist, Jackson, is a phenomenal guitar player. However, he does not have a setup like this one. He doesn't have an Axe-FX or a Helix or anything MIDI controllable. So we're actually running both my guitar and his guitar through one Axe-FX on parallel chains, which for the most part is fine. We've had to tone down the patches a little bit because we were getting very close to 100% CPU, so we've got a couple of pedals on boards in front of the Axe-FX now, and that is a rabbit hole that I wasn't prepared to go down. But otherwise, it's a very good setup. The one problem we have run into, though, is when we want to switch to our clean sound. One of the other things the Axe-FX lets you do is each of the blocks has an X configuration and a Y configuration. For instance, in our use case on this amp block here, I've got my X set to a Mesa dual rectifier, and on my Y block, I've got it set to a matchless DC30 for a clean sound. One of the very few hangups about the Axe-FX is that switching from an X config to a Y config on the amp block specifically does introduce about a quarter second of silence into the signal. So when we have a song where we have to switch from cleans to heavy sounds, we do have to precisely plan when these switches take place so that these gaps aren't noticeable, which can be difficult depending on the song. I'm sure we're going to be able to find a workaround for this eventually, and it's really not a big deal. But this is the only seam, I suppose, in what is otherwise a very seamless experience. Anyways, moving from seams to scenes. The Axe-FX allows automation of scene changes as well as program changes. Actually, the Axe-FX allows automation of every single value that you can dream of, but the one we're really interested in for the purposes of this video are program changes, as I mentioned before, and scene changes. And this is one of the things that is going to differ from device to device. Your setup might not have an analogous thing to scenes. What this does mean is that when you look at the things you're going to want to automate on your device, you're going to have to bring out the manual. Now, in my manual, in the back of it, it's got all of these MIDI control change values. And if I just roll around and look for the scene value, I notice that it's on CC number 34. So what does that mean? Well, when you're sending a control change message in MIDI, there are 128 lanes that you can send this message on. And then within each of these lanes, you can then send a value between 0 and 127. This means there's a lot of possible values that you can send. But what it means for me is that if I want to send a message to the Axe-Fx to tell it to change the scene, I have to send it down the particular lane of control change 34, or CC number 34. And then in that lane, I can then send it a value. The next thing I want to find is related to program change. I've got our bread and butter live performance preset on preset number 419. But program change messages also only go up to 127. So how do I tell the Axe-Fx to choose preset number 419? Well, according to this list, preset 419 is selectable on PC number 35 on bank D, which is CC number 0, value 3. I'll go into more detail on this later, just remember those numbers. On the Helix, it's a little different, going by the documentation. I'll touch on that a little later on. But now that we know all of this, it's time to plug everything in. Obviously, both of your devices need power, and whatever device you've got needs to be plugged in via USB somehow. You may need to install certain drivers for MIDI functionality. You might not. Honestly, it's kind of a crapshoot on Windows, and Mac doesn't tell you when it's doing anything anyway. Once you've got everything plugged in, you can open Reaper and go to MIDI devices, and just make sure that you've got MIDI output and clock send enabled to your device. Clock send is nice because I can set the tempo in Reaper, and it'll automatically change the tempo on the Axe-Fx for any effect that has a tempo sync. There's one more thing that we're going to want to take care of in Reaper preferences, and this is a really important step, so make sure you're paying attention. We're going to go to the Media section, and then the MIDI tab, and check the box that says always prompt to import tempo from MIDI files with simple tempo maps. This one checkbox, when I discovered it, literally changed my entire workflow. More on that later.
Import tempo from MIDI files with simple tempo maps. That might do it.
So now we've got everything configured, I'm going to make an automation track for our song Vanishing Act off of our latest album Willpower. It's a song that goes from dual clean guitars to one overdriven guitar to a lead sound in quick succession, so it makes a good candidate for showcasing this method. I'm going to create a new project file and insert a previously created click track and backing tracks onto separate tracks. If you're interested in how to do this yourself, I might make a follow-up video to this one because Reaper makes this really easy as well. Then I'm going to make sure the project is the same BPM as the song. In this case, it's 90. If you've got a song that has multiple tempo or time signature changes, that's easy to take care of too. Just insert a new tempo change marker wherever necessary. It is important that you do this because this tempo map is going to be included in the final MIDI file. Here's a sample of what's actually getting played back through this setup. A basic click, some bass guitar, some heavily processed backing vocals, and some extra sounds that we aren't able to efficiently recreate live.
And then obviously the breakdown.
Anyway, let's get back to the process. I'm going to insert a new empty track, and then I'm going to make a time selection for the entire length of the song. Then I'm going to insert a new MIDI item onto this track. Reaper will automatically create one that is the same length as the time selection. When I double-click this MIDI item, it will open up Reaper's MIDI edit window, which defaults to the piano roll. We don't actually need the piano roll for this. Instead, we're going to navigate to the top left corner and select Event List. This brings up an itemized consecutive list of every single MIDI event in this MIDI item, which at the moment only contains an all notes off message at the very end of the track. Finally, I'm going to navigate back to the beginning of the track to 1.1.0. This is because we're going to create MIDI messages at this point in the track. It is now time to recall all of those MIDI values that we discovered earlier in the manual. I've got them written down so that I can easily remember them. First thing I'm going to do is add a program change event on this event list, which will tell the Axe-Fx to go to preset number 419. This isn't strictly necessary for this song, but I'm doing it to demonstrate program change messages in this system. I'm not going to click the Add button up at the top of the editor window. Instead, I'm going to right-click and select Insert Bank/Program Select Event. Doing this creates a consolidated event that will send a message down the lanes CC number 0, CC number 32, and program change. So now we're in this menu here. Remember those program change values I showed you earlier? PC value of 35, CC number 0 value of 3. This is where it might get confusing. This window has bank MSB and LSB. MSB stands for most significant bit, and this is where we want to put the value for CC number 0, whereas LSB stands for least significant bit and will be sent down on CC number 32, which on the Axe corresponds to looper reverse. Okay, so LSB can be left at 0, but we want to put the bank CC value in the MSB spot, which was 3. Then in the program value spot, I'm going to put 35. This tells the Axe to load preset 35, which, when combined with the loading of bank 3, will load preset 419, as it corresponds to preset 35 on bank 3. This has now created a message at the beginning of this MIDI track that tells the Axe to go to preset 419. So great! Like I said before, this isn't strictly necessary. When the Axe turns on, it automatically loads the last preset that was being used. And I generally don't change presets that much because of scenes. And if I do, I would certainly check that I'm on the right preset at the start of a show. However, should we run into a situation where we have songs that require a whole different preset instead of just different scenes, this would be useful to automatically switch to the correct preset at the very beginning of the song. For those of you with setups that only support program changes, congrats, you're all done. You can create these messages at any point on the MIDI track to send this preset automation to your hardware. Just navigate to the part of the song that you want to create a message on and do this again, but change the values to the preset that you want to switch to. If you'd like to hear about how we do scene changes, keep watching. Otherwise, you can skip to this point in the video to learn how to bring this into your show file. Now it's time for some scene changes. I'm going to show you a handy little chart I've made that's color-coded the different scenes in our preset. As you can see, each one corresponds to rhythm, lead, clean, or fucked up lead for both of our guitarists. Myself, the S, and Jackson, the J. So on scene 1, we've got our heavy rhythm guitar sounds for both of us. Then scene 2 is for when I take a solo. Scene 4 is both of us with a clean sound, etc. You can read the chart. Vanishing Act starts with 2 clean guitars, meaning we want to start on scene 4. So I'm going to create a new event at the beginning of this track, but after the program change messages, that tells the Axe to switch to scene 4. This time I will click the Add button. It'll bring up this menu that allows you to choose what type of message to send. I want to choose control change. Side note, if you only want to send a program change message without having to change banks or anything like that, you can just do that here too. Just choose program change. If I've decided to change the position on the timeline for this event, I can do that here. But otherwise, the only thing I'm interested in is the controller dropdown and the value box. The default controller for scene select on the Axe, as we learned by reading the manual, is 34, which in Reaper is called Breath LSB, for reasons beyond my understanding. Now I'm going to change the value. By default, the Axe has MIDI values start at 0, meaning a value of 0 will correspond to scene 1, 1 will correspond to scene 2, and so on. This can be changed in the Axe settings, but I haven't bothered. So, to load scene 4, I'll want to input a value of 3. So now we've got this list of events in sequential order. At 1.1.0, the Axe will receive a message to change banks, then it will receive the value of the bank and program to change to, and then it will receive a message to select scene 4. This all happens in a fraction of a second, but it does happen in this exact order. Now it's time to input the other scene changes in this song. At 41.3.5, there's a big instrumental hit, including an overdriven guitar played by me, so I want to switch to scene 8. However, those of you who didn't skip the section on X and Y blocks and scenes will know that this might cause a problem. My overdriven guitar is using the amp on the X block, whereas my clean sound is on the Y block, so switching from one to the other is going to cause a short but noticeable gap in the sound. So instead of putting this scene change message exactly here, I'm going to place it a little bit beforehand when I'm not playing to give the Axe-Fx a chance to process the change without introducing that gap. If you skipped that section and you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry too much about it. I then got another change at 48.3.5 where I start my guitar solo. So I want to go to scene 5. I give myself a smaller bit of buffer here because I don't need to worry about switching from X back to Y on the amp block, but in case I come in a bit too early, I want to make sure that my first note isn't being played on the incorrect scene. Then, finally, I switch back to scene 4 at bar 63. And that's it for the whole song. Quick sidebar. Helix automation is a little different. If you press the presets button to open the setlist menu and navigate to the preset that you want, the Helix will actually show you the exact values you need to send in order to switch to that preset. In the example they give here on the Helix help site, they load the Factory 1 setlist, preset 16B, and Snapshot 1 with the values shown here. CC number 32 with a value of 7, for some reason, then PC with a value of 5, then CC number 69 with a value of 0. So you can use the add button for all three of these messages. Just make sure they're in the right order. First, your CC number 32 with a value of 7, then your PC with a value of 5, then CC number 69 with a value of 0. Replace these numbers with the ones your Helix tells you to use on the preset and snapshot of your choice. Quad Cortex is similar to the Axe-Fx, which is nice. We can use that consolidated bank/program select message straight out of the box here. Your MSB is going to be either 0 or 1, depending on if you're loading a preset from banks 1 to 16 or 17 to 32, respectively. Your LSB is going to correspond to the set list you want to load. And finally, your PC value will be the preset number. Now I have a click track, backing track, and automation track, all synced up to each other. I can save this project and choose to copy all the files into the project folder so that they're all in one place. Except, the MIDI file isn't in the folder. What gives? Well, MIDI files are so small that they can actually be stored inside the project file itself, so Reaper doesn't create an external MIDI file when you make one in a project. That means, though, that we have to get this MIDI file out of this project and into this folder so that we can import it into our show file. So, how do we do that? Your first instinct might be to go to the File, Export as MIDI file in the MIDI editor window. While this will indeed export the MIDI file, there's a problem. If you import this file into a project with a different tempo or time signature than you originally wrote it in, all of these messages are going to get moved around to align with incorrect positions on the timeline, and all of your hard work precisely positioning your program changes is going to go to waste. How do we get around this? Instead of clicking the File tab in the MIDI editor window, we're going to go to the File tab in the main Reaper window and choose Export Project MIDI. Since you've only got one MIDI item in this project, you don't need to worry about much in the way of extra options here. Choose where you want to save the file and what to call it. I'm saving it in the project folder. And then, and this is crucial, check the box that says Embed Project Tempo/Time Signature Changes. I'm exporting this file, and that's it for this track. Now it's time to do that for every other song. Here's a montage of me going through every track for our show at Redgate on September 17th and building all of the automation tracks for it. The nice thing about this method, as opposed to the one that I was using before, is that all of my automation gets saved into its own discrete file that I can then access later. With my previous method, I had to manually go through the entire show file and hand edit where the changes needed to happen, which was a lengthy process. Writing the automation for this 45-minute set took me about 45 minutes, and then actually building the show file took about 10 minutes. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to create a brand new project, and I'm going to go into my project settings and set my default time base for items/envelopes/markers to time. This will make it so that tempo changes mid-track won't cause my audio tracks to automatically stretch and desynchronize. I drag and drop the MIDI file for our first song into it, which, hey, remember when I told you to check that box that said, always prompt to import tempo from MIDI files with simple tempo maps? This is why. I check the import tempo map option on the import screen and boom, a new tempo change marker is created at the beginning of the project at the tempo of the song. Now I'm going to drag the click and track into 2 new tracks on the project, and because I created this MIDI file to precisely sync up with them, as long as they all start on the same time on the timeline, all the changes will sync up perfectly. You may notice that the MIDI file isn't the same length as the click in the track. Don't panic. This is because during export, Reaper will automatically truncate the MIDI file length to where the last MIDI message is. I didn't know this at first, and I had a little heart attack. Now I do the same thing for the next song. It's also at 180 BPM, but notice that it still creates a new tempo change marker when I drag in the MIDI. What happens when I drag in a MIDI file for a song with a different tempo? Reaper automatically creates the tempo change markers, meaning that, again, as long as my MIDI, click, and track all start at the same point in the timeline, perfect sync. This third song even has multiple tempo and time signature changes, and it's still perfect. I'm not kidding you when I say that when I figured this out, I was over the moon.
Yes! Oh, it did it. Oh my goodness. I don't have to make the tempo changes myself. I can just put them in the project. And then I can put them in the MIDI and it'll automatically do the tempo. Holy shit. That's so good.
This is an absolute game changer for us. This makes it so building a show file has gone from something that would take me an hour or more to something that I can finish in the time it takes to watch
this video. What? Not good enough to play your own music?
The very last thing I have to do is make sure that I set the MIDI hardware output on the automation track to the Axe-Fx. Then I can go ahead and test it out and make sure everything works. And that is how Reaper makes guitar patch changes stupid easy. Hey, you're still here. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful and you've started integrating this into your own workflow, comment below how you're using it in your performances. I'm sure this can be done in other DAWs, but I do feel, as someone who works in multiple professional audio settings, that Reaper is just one of the best for independent artists. It's fully featured, it's powerful, and it's inexpensive. And it doesn't lock important functionality behind a subscription either. Plus, it does everything that I need it to do, including making my live performance life easier. Anyway, that's all for now. If you've got any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to chat with you. Hopefully I'll have more videos for you soon. Bye now.